The most expensive mistake a person can make is deciding, in advance, exactly what you're worth. My wife made that mistake. I helped her make it. My name is Raymond Kessler. I'm 63 years old, and on Tuesday, the 8th of October, 2024, my wife set a slate gray folder on the kitchen table next to my toast and told me it was nothing personal. We live in a brick row house on the flat of Beacon Hill in Boston, the kind with the crooked stairs and the radiator that knocks like somebody's trying to get out. It was a little before 7. I had the newspaper folded to the crossword, the way I do every morning. Nadine was already dressed for court charcoal suit, hair pinned back, the pearl earrings she wore when she needed to look like somebody's mother in front of a judge. My office drafted something, she said, not sitting down. I'd like you to look at it this week. I looked at the folder. Her firm's name embossed on the cover in that dark green they use. Braddock, Ansell, and Rowe. Everything about it was crisp. A little too crisp, the way a thing is, when it's been sitting in a drawer waiting for the right morning. What is it? A postnuptial agreement. She said it the way you'd say the dryer's fixed. It's standard. I do 6 of these a month for other people. It's frankly embarrassing that I haven't done one for us. We've been married 4 years, Nadine, which is 4 years of exposure. She checked her watch. Read it. Gus can look at it if you want, though honestly, Ray, there's not much to look at on your side. She picked up her bag. She did not kiss me goodbye. She hadn't done that since March. I know, because I'm the kind of man who notices, and worse, the kind who counts. The door pulled shut. The radiator knocked twice. I read all 31 pages standing up, because sitting felt like agreeing to something. And on page 19, under a heading about equitable characterization, I found the phrase her associates had chosen to describe 39 years of my working life. The husband's economic contribution to the marital estate is de minimis. De minimis. Latin. It means too small to bother with. It means beneath the notice of the court. I want to tell you I felt rage. I didn't. What I felt was the quiet click a lathe makes when the tool finally bites true. Not anger, friend. Arithmetic. Come on in and get comfortable, friend. Pour yourself something. This one takes a while. And it takes some turns. Do me a favor before we get going. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, because I read every one of them, and it means more to an old man than you'd think. Hit that like button. And if you're new here, subscribe. Now let me back this thing up, because the story doesn't start on that Tuesday in October. It starts 6 years earlier at an estate auction in Concord, Massachusetts, over a rusted-out machinist's chest that I wanted and a woman in a raincoat who did not. October 2018. Saturday morning. A dead man's belongings spread out on wet grass behind a farmhouse. I'd driven out because the listing mentioned a Gerstner chest with the original drawer felt, and I'm the sort of person who will drive 40 minutes for drawer felt. She was standing near the furniture, arms crossed, bidding on a roll-top desk, and losing badly to a dealer from Worcester who kept going up in increments of $5 just to be irritating. He's not going to stop, I said. She looked at me. How do you know? Because he's not buying the desk. He's buying your reaction. She bid one more time, lost it, and laughed. Not a polite laugh either. A real one, out loud, in a field full of strangers. That laugh cost me the next 6 years of my life, and if I'm honest with you, I'd probably pay it again. Nadine Keel, she said, sticking out her hand. What do you do now, friend? I've been asked that question my whole adult life, and I learned a long time ago to answer it in a way that ends the conversation. Little bit of manufacturing consulting, I said. Mostly retired. I fix things. Most people move along after I fix things. She didn't. She stood there in a field in the rain and asked me what kind of things, and then asked a follow-up question, and then another one. And by the time the auctioneer got to the tools, she knew what a surface grinder was and had opinions about it. She was a divorce attorney. 14 years at Braddock, Ansell and Rowe, in the running for name partner. Sharp as a fresh blade, and funny in that flat, dry way that sneaks up on you. She told me she'd been to 400 weddings worth of endings, and still believed in the beginnings, which I thought was either the bravest thing I'd ever heard or the best line she had. Here's what Nadine Keel believed about Raymond Kessler that morning in Concord. And honestly, she came by the belief honestly. 60-year-old widower. Small house on the hill, Paid off. Old Volvo wagon with 190,000 miles on it. Fixes things, reads, doesn't post anything anywhere because he doesn't have anywhere to post it. Here's what was actually true. In 1984, with $11,000 and a used engine lathe, I started a company in a leased bay in Everett, making precision valve assemblies for water treatment plants, Pelham valve, and controls. Nobody's ever heard of us, and that was always the point. Municipal work, then pharmaceutical, then 22 years of slow, boring, compounding growth in an industry where nothing is glamorous and everything is necessary. I had 240 employees when my wife, Carol, died in 2011, and I had no reason to be there anymore without her. So, in 2013, I sold the whole operation to a family-owned German group that wanted a North American footprint. There was no press release. There was no LinkedIn post. Because I don't have a LinkedIn, I signed the documents on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room in Frankfurt, flew home in coach because I'd booked it myself and didn't think to fix it, and celebrated by eating a roast beef sandwich in my truck in a parking lot in Chelsea while it rained. What I did next is the part that matters. Money that announces itself attracts people who are very good at asking. So I put it away, not in a mattress in structure, 2 holding companies, a private trust, a family limited partnership, an old friend at a Providence firm who does nothing but this and does it beautifully. By 2014, there was not one significant asset in the United States with the name Raymond Kessler printed on the deed, not to hide from a wife. I didn't have a wife. I hid it out of habit and out of grief, and because after Carol died, I could not stand the idea of being interesting to anybody. So when Nadine Keel decided, sometime around our 2nd year of dating, to run a background check on me, and she did, friend, she absolutely did. She's a divorce attorney. Of course she did. The report came back exactly the way she'd hoped. Clean credit. 1 property. Modest. A dissolved consulting LLC. No liens, no litigation, no surprises. A nice, boring, harmless, retired man. She checked. I want to be fair to her about that, because people always ask me that part first. How did a divorce attorney not know? She checked. The trouble with checking is that a search only returns what's in your name, and nothing had been in my name in 11 years. We got married on the 18th of September, 2020, in a garden in Cambridge with 26 people and a string trio that played too loud. Her firm sent an arrangement so large we had to take a door off its hinges to get it inside. I remember standing in the kitchen looking at that thing and thinking, those aren't wedding flowers, those are relief. I didn't know what I meant by it. I filed the thought away. I file everything. It's a machinist's disease. You keep the odd offcut because someday it's exactly the piece you need. The first 2 years were good. I mean that. She'd come home wrung out from some ugly custody fight and sit on the kitchen floor with her back against the dishwasher, and I'd make her eggs at 10 at night, and she'd tell me about the whole miserable business. I fixed the radiator. I rebuilt the back stairs. I liked being useful to somebody again. But there were firm dinners. At firm dinners I was introduced as Ray, who's retired. And then the conversation moved on and I ate my salmon. There was a managing partner there named Marcus Devereaux. Silver hair, very good teeth, the kind of man who touches your elbow when he talks to you. 3 separate times, across 3 separate dinners, in front of other people, Marcus Devereaux introduced me as Nadine's house husband. He thought it was funny. He'd say it and then laugh first, so you'd know it was a joke. My oldest friend in the world is a man named Ollie Rusk, 64 years old, ran my 2nd plant for 19 years, has never once in his life said a thing he didn't mean. He came to one of those dinners as my +1, and afterward, out on the sidewalk on Boylston Street with his tie already loose, he said, "You notice how she introduced you? She introduced me fine. She introduced you like a coat she hung up." He wasn't being cruel. Ollie's never cruel. Ray, I watched her introduce that firm's 3rd quarter numbers with more warmth in her voice than she used on you. She's proud of me, Ollie. He looked at me for a good long second. That's not what proud looks like, buddy. I told him he was being dramatic, and we got a beer, and I didn't think about it again for 18 months. Friend, if there's one thing I'd hand you out of this entire story, it's this. When the person who's known you 40 years tells you something once, quietly, on a sidewalk, without wanting anything from you. That's not an opinion. That's a smoke detector. Now, May 2024, a Thursday. Nadine had asked me to scan and email a set of insurance documents to our agent because she'd been trying and failing to do it from her phone. We have an old flatbed scanner in the back room that I refurbished myself, and like a lot of refurbished office equipment, it keeps a local archive of everything that passes through it. She didn't know that. In fairness, why would she? I was clicking backward through the archive looking for the insurance rider, and I went one folder too far, and I found a document she'd scanned in February and forgotten about. It was a firm cover sheet. Matter intake form. Braddock, Ansel, and Rowe. Matter 4417. Kessler, R. Personal. Responsible attorney. N. Keel. Billing. Non-client. Internal. I sat down. I want to be precise with you about what happened in my chest, because I've had a heart event and I know the difference. This wasn't that. This was the floor going soft. She had opened a file on me, at her firm, under a matter number, with her initials on it. There were 14 pages behind that cover sheet. Not a diary, not a rant. A work plan. Phase 1, listed as complete. Establish separate title on Wellesley property. Move brokerage accounts out of joint tenancy. Phase 2, build documented record of independent household contribution. Postnuptial instrument. Q. 4, 2024. Phase 3, with a date beside it. Printed in a clean serif font on a Thursday afternoon in a quiet house. Dissolution. Q. 1, 2026. There was a section labeled Character and Optics. I read that one 4 times. Subject presents as stable, non-litigious, low public profile. Favorable optic for Partnership Committee Re. Prior concerns regarding personal warmth. Recommend maintaining domestic status quo through Q4 2025. And on page 9, under people to coordinate with, one name I knew, M. Devereaux, the man who called me a house husband, 3 times, to my face. I closed the laptop. I stood in that back room for a while, with my hand on the top of the scanner, like it was a dog that had bitten somebody. Then I went to the kitchen and started a pot roast, because there are certain kinds of news that a man can only process while browning meat. And somewhere between the onions and the carrots, I understood the thing that hurt worse than the plan itself. Nadine hadn't married me, in spite of the fact that I was nobody. She married me because I was nobody. Think about it with me. A divorce attorney up for name partner, and the whisper going around the committee was that she was cold. Formidable, brilliant, cold. And what fixes cold in the eyes of 11 people voting in a conference room? A quiet, steady, unglamorous husband who fixes radiators and never causes a problem and never ever competes for the oxygen in a room. I wasn't a partner in a marriage. I wasn't even really a husband. I was a character reference with a wedding ring. And here's the part that took me longest to swallow. Every single thing she believed about me was true. I was quiet. I was invisible. I was exactly the man in that report. She did her homework, and she got an A. She just never thought to ask what quiet men do with 40 years of practice at making things fit. She came home at 8:20 that night. She said the house smelled incredible. We ate. She told me about a deposition. I told her about my day, the edited version. We watched half a program about the Panama Canal and went up to bed, and while she slept I lay there listening to the radiator and made a decision that took 18 months to finish. No confrontation, no shouting, not one raised voice, because you can't beat a long plan by getting loud, friend. You beat it by having a longer one. Which brings me back to Tuesday, the 8th of October, 2024, the gray folder, 31 pages, de minimis, right on schedule, Q4 2024, exactly as written. I finished my coffee, and I called the one man I should have called 5 months earlier. Before we get into that, do an old man one small favor. If you've been riding along this far, take 1 second and subscribe. It's free, it takes a tap, and it's the whole reason stories like this get made. Hit that like button too, and tell me in the comments, would you have signed it? Or would you have filed that Monday? I want to know. All right, back to it. Gus Trammell has been my attorney since 1997. He's built like a fire hydrant. He wears the same brown shoes he's worn for 20 years. And he has the disposition of a man who has been arguing with people professionally since Reagan's second term. He drove up from Providence the next morning and read all 31 pages at my kitchen table without saying a word. Then he set them down and did something Gus does not do. He took his glasses off. First thing, he said, so you and I are using the correct word. This is not a prenup. A prenup is signed before a marriage. You've been married 4 years. What your wife handed you is a postnuptial agreement, and the difference matters. Because a postnup means the person you're married to has already sat down with a calculator and worked out the shape of the ending. All right. Second thing, he tapped page 19. Whoever drafted this treated your disclosure as a formality. Your side of the schedule is 1 paragraph. She didn't ask. She assumed. She had me looked into before we got engaged. Sure she did. Gus put his glasses back on. And I'd bet my house it came back beautiful. I told him about matter 4417. I told him about phase 3 and the date. I told him about Devereaux's name on page 9. Gus didn't interrupt me once, which for Gus is a small miracle, because the man interrupts judges. When I finished, he leaned back and looked at the ceiling for maybe 30 seconds. She wrote it down, he said. 14 pages. Ray, that's either the most arrogant thing I've ever heard or the dumbest. It's both, I said. That's what we're going to use. He picked up his legal pad. Then let me say the obvious thing out loud, because I'm required to. You can file for divorce Monday morning. Every dollar you have is already out of reach. Structured, seasoned, and predating this marriage by 7 years. You'd win. You'd win boring. 6 weeks? Maybe 8. I know. So why are we sitting here? I thought about how to say it. Outside, a truck was backing up somewhere on Charles Street, beeping. Because if I file Monday, I said, she loses a case. She'll tell the story for the rest of her life as a thing that happened to her. Bad luck, a stubborn old man, a technicality. I turned my coffee cup around on the table. If I wait, she doesn't lose a case. She loses the argument. I want her to know the exact date she made the mistake. And I want her to have made it herself, in her own handwriting, with her own signature on the bottom. Gus was quiet a second. Then he said, you want to sign her agreement. Every word of it, unchanged. And Gus Trammell, who I have watched cross-examine a state senator without blinking, smiled at me for the first time in about 9 years. All right, he said. Let's build it. Here's the thing about a postnuptial agreement, friend. And I want you to hear this even if you never remember another thing about my story. A postnup protects what's disclosed. It carves the world into her column and my column, based on what the parties put on the schedule. Nadine's document protected everything she owned, with beautiful, airtight, expensive precision. And about my side, it said almost nothing at all. She'd built a fortress around herself to keep out a retired manufacturing consultant. Now, over the next 11 months, 3 things happened, and none of them were loud. The first was a building. Braddock, Ansel, and Rowe leases 11 floors of a tower in the financial district, and had for 19 years, on a long-term arrangement that came up for renegotiation in 2026. That building was owned by a private real estate trust that had been quietly acquiring older Class A office assets while everybody else was panicking about downtown. In November 2024, an entity called Quarry Lane Holdings took a controlling position in that trust. Quarry Lane Holdings is a Delaware company with a name so dull that people's eyes slide right off it. That's on purpose. Boring names hold interesting things. I learned that in 1986, from a man in Ohio who owned half a county. Gus split the acquisition across 4 tranches over 5 months, so nothing tripped a reporting threshold. By spring 2025, my wife's firm was paying rent every single month into a structure that ran back through 3 layers. You'd have to be looking with a flashlight to find to her de minimis husband. The second thing was money. Litigation is expensive, and big family and commercial firms increasingly work with litigation finance funds that front costs on contingency matters. Braddock, Ansel, and Rowe used one. A mid-sized outfit in Connecticut that was, in early 2025, quietly raising a second vehicle and looking for an anchor investor. I anchored it. Not in my name. Through a fund of funds, through a partnership interest, through a limited partner position so far down the chain that the general partner has never met me and never will. The third thing was Marcus Devereaux. And I'm not going to pretend to you this one was strategic. This one was personal. Devereaux had borrowed against his partnership equity in 2019 to buy a place on the Cape. That note had been sold, as these things are, into a private credit portfolio. I bought the position in that portfolio in June 2025. Gus asked how many layers I wanted between me and it. 3, minimum. 3's plenty, Ray. He called me a house husband, I said, 3 times. To my face, in front of people, I let out a breath. Make it 4. Gus laughed out loud, which I hadn't heard in a long time. Now, here's where people usually stop me and say, "So you went cold. You checked out. You stopped loving her." Friend, I did not. I made her eggs at 10 at night when she came home wrung out. I rebuilt the back stairs a second time because I'd used the wrong fasteners. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher and listened to her talk about a custody case that was tearing her up. And I meant every bit of the listening. In March of 2025, she got the flu, and I slept in the chair in the bedroom for 3 nights. Because the moment I changed, the moment she caught 1 degree of temperature drop, the whole thing came apart. And Nadine Keel could read a room the way most people read a stop sign. Instantly, without effort, without seeming to look. So I gave her nothing to read. Every Tuesday I told her I was going to the woodworking co-op in Somerville. Some Tuesdays I did. Some Tuesdays I drove to a small rented office in Providence and spent 4 hours quietly taking apart the assumptions underneath her entire professional life. Nobody ever said revenge had to look like revenge. Sometimes it looks exactly like a decent marriage. That's the part that costs you. And I want to be honest with you now, because if I only tell you the clever parts, I'm lying by omission. There was a night in February 2025, sleet coming sideways off the river, hitting the front windows like thrown gravel. She'd gone up at 10. I sat down in the dark kitchen with a bourbon I didn't drink, and it came over me all at once. Not the plan, not the file, not Devereaux, just this. I was 63 years old. I had buried one wife I loved, and I had walked into a wet field in Concord in 2018 and thought I'd gotten lucky twice. I had wanted it to be real, even after the scanner. Some stubborn, foolish 17-year-old part of me had gone on wanting it to be real for 9 solid months. I sat there with that for a while. I'm not going to tell you how long. Then I poured the bourbon down the sink, rinsed the glass, put it in the rack, and went up to bed. And on Tuesday I drove to Providence and kept working. Because wanting a thing to have been different and letting it take you apart are 2 entirely separate decisions, friend. Nobody gets the first one. Everybody gets the second one. October 2025. 1 year, almost to the week, after the gray folder. Everything seasoned and documented. Gus said on the phone, "You want me to draft a counterproposal?" "Not a counterproposal," I said. "A disclosure." "How thorough?" "I want the associate who opens it to go get a partner. Give me 3 weeks. You've got 16 days. 16 days later, Gus laid 61 pages on my kitchen table, like a man setting down a full pan of something hot. "That's all of it," he said. The 2013 sale and its full disposition. The trust. The family limited partnership. Quarry Lane Holdings and the trust position in the tower her firm sits in. The anchor position in the litigation fund. The Devereaux note. Every layer traceable, dated, and clean. Nothing hidden. Nothing that needed hot to sign. Her postnup had been 31 pages. Mine ran 61. She'd brought a scalpel to a machine shop. "Send it," I said. "And Gus, tell them we're accepting her agreement. Exactly as drafted." The call came back 4 days later, and it did not come from Nadine. It came from a partner at her own firm named Ellis Braddock, one of the actual Braddocks, 68 years old, 31 years in family law, a man who has seen everything twice. Gus told me the call lasted 7 minutes, and that Braddock talked the way people talk when they're stepping on ice and listening for a crack. Mr. Trammell, your client's disclosure indicates holdings substantially in excess of what was represented in the schedule. Nothing was represented in the schedule, Gus said. That's rather the point. My colleague would like to revisit the terms of the postnuptial agreement. Gus looked across the desk at me. I shook my head once. The terms are hers, Gus said. Mr. Kessler wouldn't change a comma. There was a long silence on that line. Then Ellis Braddock said, I understand, and hung up, and went and closed his office door, and according to a friend of Gus's who works 2 floors down, did not come out for 50 minutes. 50 minutes, friend. I've sat across from enough people at enough tables to know what 50 minutes behind a closed door means. It means the numbers don't come out the way somebody promised they would. Nadine came home at 3:40 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. That was the first thing. Nadine never came home in the afternoon. That woman treated our house like a hotel she happened to have feelings about. But there she was at the kitchen table when I came in from the hardware store. No laptop open. No phone in her hand. Just sitting, still in her coat. I knew right then. I didn't let my face know. Hey, I said, setting down the bag. You're home early. She looked at me for a long moment. Really looked, the way she used to in the beginning, like I was a mechanism she hadn't figured out yet. Ellis called me, she said, about your disclosure. Okay, Ray. She said my name, like it weighed something. Quarry Lane. I filled a glass at the sink and took my time about it. What about it? You know what about it. Outside, somebody's car alarm went off on Revere Street and shut itself up again. The refrigerator hummed. The whole ordinary world going right along. How long? She asked. How long what? How long have you known? I turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at my wife. Since May of last year, I said. Matter 4,417. She closed her eyes. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to watch the calculation run behind them. The scanner, she said. The scanner. You never said anything. Neither did you. She stood up and walked to the window and stood with her back to me, looking down at the brick sidewalk. I let her stand there. I wasn't in any hurry. I hadn't been in a hurry for a year and a half. How much is it? She said finally, not turning around. How much is what? How much do you have, Ray? And that, friend, was not a question. That was the sound of a woman doing math in her head and not caring for the total. More than the firm you're trying to make partner at is worth, I said. She turned around, and I'll tell you, I expected fury, or that flat courtroom composure she could put on like a coat. What I got was something else, something scraped down to the bare metal. For about 4 seconds, she looked like a person instead of a strategy. What do you want? She said quietly. What do you actually want out of this? I thought about the real answer, not the legal one. What I wanted was the woman who laughed out loud in a wet field in Concord in October 2018 over a roll-top desk she lost to a dealer from Worcester. I wanted the person who sat on the floor with her back against the dishwasher. I wanted a marriage. But you can't want back a thing that was never manufactured in the first place. Nothing you haven't already offered me. I said, the agreement stands. Your draft. Your terms. Every word. She stared at me, waiting for the trap. The building, she said slowly. You own our building. A position in the trust that owns it. Yes. And the litigation fund. Her voice was very level. And Marcus's note. 4 layers, I said. But yes. She shook her head, and it wasn't anger. It looked closer to disbelief. You did all of that, while living here, while making me eggs, while sleeping in that chair when I had the flu. You had a plan through the first quarter of 2026, I said. I had one that ran a little longer. She was quiet a long time. Long enough that the light in the kitchen went from afternoon to that blue color. It gets in late October when the day gives up early. When she spoke again, she had her voice back. All the way back, but her eyes weren't the same. I underestimated you, she said. I held her look. Yes, I said. You did. She nodded once, picked up her bag, and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the front door pull shut. I stood at that window for a good while afterward, looking down at the same bricks she'd been looking at. It didn't feel like winning, friend. I want to be straight with you about that, because I think anybody who tells you it does is selling something. It felt like watching a thing end that had been built wrong on purpose from the first day, and knowing that no amount of good work on my end could have made it hold. I poured a glass of water and drank it, standing at the sink. Then I called Ollie. She knows, I said. How'd she take it? I thought about it. Like herself, I said, right up until the last 4 seconds. The dissolution was signed on a Tuesday morning in January 2026. It took 19 minutes. Her agreement protected every asset she had disclosed, completely and beautifully. It said nothing whatsoever about a real estate trust, a Connecticut litigation fund, or a private credit portfolio, because she had drafted it in a world where Raymond Kessler was a retired man who fixed radiators. She had built a fortress against the man she thought she'd married. She had nothing at all against the man she actually married. I moved out that same week, hired 2 young fellas with a box truck, took my tools and my books and Carol's photographs and the Gerstner chest, and left everything of hers precisely where she'd put it. Clean. Efficient. She'd have admired the efficiency if it had been happening to somebody else. I took a place in Charlestown, with a view of the Navy Yard, and a kitchen with terrible light and good bones. Marcus Devereaux left the firm in March. The stated reason was health. The actual reason was that a private credit position had been sold to a party who declined to renegotiate, and a man cannot serve on a compensation committee while explaining that to his partners. I never made a single phone call about Marcus Devereaux. I didn't have to. I just stopped being invisible, and the room did the rest. The name partner vote happened in April. Nadine did not get it. I want to be careful here, friend, because a lot of folks want this story to be about women, and it isn't. I've known men who did exactly what she did. I sat across from 2 of them in acquisition negotiations in the 90s, and both of them are wealthy today. This isn't about women or men. It's about a certain kind of person who looks at a marriage and sees a balance sheet with a soft spot in it. Nadine's only real distinction is that she wrote hers down and gave it a matter number. Ollie drove down at the end of April, and we ate breakfast at a diner in Southie with linoleum older than both of us. You gonna say it? He said. Say what? You know what? I stirred my coffee. You were right, I said, on the sidewalk on Boylston. 6 years ago. I should have listened to you. And I didn't. And it cost me 6 years. Ollie nodded slowly and went back to his eggs. And after a minute he said, Wasn't 6 years wasted, though? How do you figure? You learned what you're worth. He pointed his fork at me. Took you 63 years and a lawyer, but you got there. I put him on the board of the shop I bought in June. A little 12-man machine shop in Quincy that was going under because the owner's son didn't want it. I bought it out of the trust, in my own name, printed right there on the paperwork where anybody could read it. Ollie runs it. We make brackets and fittings. Nobody's ever heard of us. That's still my favorite part. Saturday mornings I teach a class at a vocational school in Braintree. 16 kids, ages 17 to 20. Half of them convinced they're not smart because somebody told them so. I show them how to read a micrometer and how to take a cut that doesn't chatter. There's a woman named Ruth who teaches the welding section down the hall. And last Saturday she asked me what I was reading at lunch. And for the first time in about 15 years, friend, I told somebody the honest answer instead of the short one. That's all that's happened so far. I'm not going to promise you more than that. Here's what I've got for you, and then I'll let you go. An agreement can protect money. That's all it does. But how a person asks you to sign one, the words they pick, the morning they choose, whether they sit down or stay standing, that tells you exactly what they think you're worth. Read that part. That part's free, and it's the only part that's ever true. And if somebody in your life has decided you're too small to bother with, let them keep believing it, friend. Just keep your receipts. If this one got to you, do me the favor, hit that like button, leave me a comment, and tell me where you're listening from. And subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you then. Take care of yourselves.